Welcome to the first ever episode of the Site Report. Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the scenes on a construction site? What about community engagement and how employees grow in their careers? And who can forget about those funny stories that had you laughing to the point of tears? Listen with us as we uncover the remarkable stuff we do. And to kick off our premiere episode, I figure why not bring two people on who've been with Keller for quite some time and probably have a good story or two that they would like to share. So, JD and Nigel, thank you so much for joining us today for the first episode of the Site Report. I'm really excited to hear what you both have to say about your experience here at Keller. I know you've both been here for such a long time. You've probably seen a lot, some stuff you probably didn't really want to see, but you saw it anyway. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about your experience and just how, Keller has developed over the past 30 plus years since when you did first start. So, Nigel, I'd like to start with you, just because I know you did kind of just celebrate an anniversary. So, can you just talk to us a little bit about what you started out doing? Were you always involved in the construction industry? Did you want to work in the engineering field? So, kind of how you got your start, and then how did that lead you to start working at Keller?
So, no, I did not always want to be in the construction industry. I started out sitting with a buddy of mine who was a soccer guy, and he said, I want to be a civil engineer. And being very well educated and 18 or something, I was like, I have no idea what that is. And he's like, yeah, they're really cool. They build cool stuff. And I was like, so like what? Like dams? And he's like, yeah, like dams. So we carry on through high school, and I decided I didn't want to go to college. So I took a year out after high school, realized there's no money in that, decided, well, the only thing I knew anything about at all was civil engineering. So I better go to college.
Mhm.
Ended up going to college. He did not go to college. He never became a civil engineer. In fact, I was talking to him at Christmas, and he's still selling aluminum, as they say over here. And I got into civil engineering at the University of Manchester and went through that school. But at the end of that, I decided that what I really wanted to do, and I'd got a job with a company called RDL, which is a big bridge builder in England. I decided I wanted to give playing soccer a shot. So I came over
Mhm.
to the States to play soccer. And that worked out. That was fun. I did a lot of coaching, really. There wasn't a lot of money in it, but it was a lot of fun.
Mhm.
And then I decided, right, I've either got to do that or I've got to go back and get a real job. So I went back to England to get a real job. And the company I had joined coming out of college had been acquired. My job didn't exist anymore. And I had to re-interview. So they sent me on a re-interview lap, and I got a job with Cementation, who was on the freeze wall seminar yesterday at my coal mine in North Selby, which is where I started working. Joe Sopko is actually talking about a freeze wall that I started work right after in 1983.
Hmm.
Wow.
And that was brilliant. And I
Yeah.
really enjoyed the coal mine. Went through that and the rest of cementation piling, and then decided I wanted to move back to the States. So got a PE in 87 and moved back to the States in February of 87 and went into Georgia Tech and they were like, well, you don't even go to school in Georgia Tech. So, what are you even doing here? And I was like, I need a job. And they're like, you've got a funny accent. Why don't you go upstairs to see Professor Barksdale? So I went to see Barksdale.
Dick Barksdale.
Remember him?
Oh, yeah.
And he goes, I got a buddy in Tampa who's looking for somebody, and his name's Jim Henry. So drove down to Tampa, and after Jim Henry had forgotten we had a meeting for the entire day, spent the entire day on the sofa in the front of Tampa's office. Got a job with Hayward Baker, which was absolutely brilliant, and really been here ever since.
Yeah.
So that was a long-winded way of saying how I got into engineering.
Hell no.
Yeah, and JD, how I would like to hear, I know we work pretty frequently together, but I don't even know if I know kind of how you got your start. And I don't know if a lot of people at the company really know kind of how you got into the industry as well. So I'd love to hear from you about that.
Well, yes, if I always knew, I guess I kind of did. I mean,
Hmm.
my father was in the dredging industry, so I always hear stories from him and such. So I kind of always was intrigued. A lot of neat stories, and so construction was always kind of an element within our household.
Hmm.
And a lot of his brothers and family and all were in the dredging industry. So, and I was decent at math and science, and also engineering just kind of seemed like the way to go. Even though I didn't necessarily know a lot about it, other than it was involved with making things, kind of like what Nigel said, construction and then making neat stuff and all. And I was always kind of a bit of a problem solver. I enjoyed seeing something and trying to figure out how to solve it, how to fix it, whatever. So it's kind of natural. And then went to school, went to undergraduate school up in New York City at Columbia University, and that was a wild time because it was Tampa at the time where I grew up was kind of a small town, and then my family, my mom and dad, put me on a plane in Tampa and said, "See you at Christmas," and I landed in New York City with myself a Foot Locker in a suitcase and drug it to a curb and had a piece of paper with an address written on and gave it to the taxi driver, and he dropped me off and figured out where to go and everything else. So it's pretty wild. 4 years in New York City was pretty neat.
Yeah.
And that was engineering school, and I swam during that time too. So I kind of, even though I was on my own, I kind of had a group of people that we did everything together, and also that made kind of a family there. And then after 4 years in New York, I tried to decide I wanted to go to grad school, and I decided I kind of had enough of the Northeast and snow and everything else. So I ended up going out to California to get a master's, and that was fun. So I was outside of LA in Pasadena, Caltech, and so did that. And then when I got out of that, I went into consulting initially. So company that doesn't exist anymore, Law Engineering, got acquired by URS and everything else. So the actual company, but did that for a number of years. And then one day I was working in Charleston, South Carolina. Our company just started an office there. So they asked me if I wanted to go up from Tampa. I had started in Tampa. And so I said, sure, I'll go up there and kind of get that started. So I was there, and then a guy that I worked with at Law Engineering gave me a call. His name was Mark Kelling, and he said, "Hey, we're looking for an engineer." The guy who runs the business down there I'm working with now. I suggested your name to him. You're interested? I said, "Oh, maybe I'll talk to you." So a guy by the name of Tom Dobson, who was running things at the time, he and Mark flew up to Charleston. We had dinner one night and told me all about Keller, and it was what they do. And I said, "Oh, that sounds kind of neat, but this is interesting what I'm doing. I'm having fun. So thanks, but no thanks." And so they flew off, and I thought about it for a few days, and the more I thought about it, the more interesting it sounded. And even though I just moved to Charleston a couple years before, it was like, the neat thing too is back in Tampa, that was their operations. So that was where my family lived and everything. So I called him back about a week later and said, "Have you hired anybody yet?" He said, "No, no." I said, "Well, I think I want to try it because it sounded kind of neat." So that was in '84. So that's when I started with the company, and we were Keller at the time. And within a year, we acquired Hayward Baker and became, at the time, GCAN. Hayward Baker,
GCAN, that's right.
owned by a British company, big British company. But so I started that, and then we switched from being called Keller to Hayward Baker. We just used that name because it was a well-known name, had a great reputation, and also, and that's it worked for a lot of years, and until just a couple years ago when the companies all came together, all the different, there were a lot of acquisitions through those years coming up. But I was a engineer for a lot of my career, half my career. So I was chief engineer for the Southeast, but I really enjoyed meeting with clients, finding out what their challenge was, and solving it, and I enjoyed presenting at conferences and writing papers and stuff. So I kind of, about midway through my career, made a transition from straight engineering to business development. So trying to go out and find work, meet with clients, understand what their problems are, but all my work up to that point had kind of set me up to be able to do that because I knew pretty much everything we did. I was involved with design or maybe even on projects and such. So I could understand how we can figure out what the optimum solution is for whatever the client's challenge is, and get that, and then get other folks to run the numbers and double check what my gut was, and also put dollars on it, and got where I am. So
Yeah,
that's
I was gonna say, I feel like you both have pretty interesting backgrounds getting to the company? And then obviously, you've been here for such a long time. You've probably seen so much, obviously, all the acquisitions that have happened, the different people that have worked here, maybe they've gone to another company to come back. So what are some things that you've seen over, your 30 plus years of being here, just from, the minute you walked in the door to maybe now? I mean, have things been drastically different? Do you think one thing has pretty much stayed the same over, your time here so far?
Yeah, it's changed. It's interesting. JD hesitated and called Dobson back because I hesitated as well. And I went to an interview with Frankie Pyle up in Boston and a couple of other companies that were deep foundations. And Haywood Baker was all about ground modification, and that's not what I was about. And I was kind of like, this is really not what I know anything about. And then I
Sure.
got a call from a Frankie guy who's like, Nigel, you need to join Haywood Baker because we're going bust, and I'd feel bad if you guys joined us. So I was like, okay. So I went, and Dobson gave me another interview with Bob Rubright, and I joined these guys down here in Tampa. And it was a small operation back then. I mean, the whole of North America, as I remember it, was maybe 30 or $40 million
Hmm.
total.
Wow.
And I mean, we're arguing about $40 million jobs right now, and
Hmm.
not $40 million offices, let alone the whole of North America.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of drills and some vibrators, and we would go compaction grouting and vibro and DDC and not a lot else. And then we grew into all the jet grouting and micropiles and tie bags and saw nailing and everything else that we do now. And the amount of growth, GCAN, Haywood Baker became ultimately Keller again. The amount of growth that we've had in this country is truly, or in North America, is truly astonishing.
Yeah.
And the number of people it takes to keep that going compared to, when we went up, well, you beat me by 3 years, but you had a PM conference before the one I went to in Texas, where we again shared a room, which we will never talk about. But it's like, there were 30 people at that PM conference in Texas, out in the woods in the ice storm, wherever Nick Siriopoulos put us.
Yeah.
And now it's like there are hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And that's, you've left most of them at home.
Yeah.
That was all of us.
Yeah. That was the company.
Yeah, it's astonishing the level of growth we've had in product and people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, I was only 3 years before him, but when I started first year, we did $2 million worth of work.
Amazing.
And then we acquired Haywood Baker, as I mentioned, and they were like a $7 million a year company.
Yeah. Amazing.
And the first year we did like 15 million together. So it was like, and I remember Tom Dobson saying within 3 years we'll be doing $30 million worth of work. And we said, what is he on? He's crazy.
Right, this guy's out of his mind.
Yeah.
So I've seen the North American operation go from 2 million to 2 billion. So it's just amazing. And half of that growth has been organic through just kind of offices growing, getting more work, hiring people. And half of that's been through acquisitions. And that's been a fun, exciting part of being with the company too, because they, each of these companies, they have their own culture originally. Obviously, a lot of them were smaller companies, some not so small, but they fit a really good niche somewhere that we were lacking, whether it was geographic, an area of the country like Denver grouting or something. We didn't have any operations in that area. And the gentleman who started that company and stuff was looking to retire, and we worked with him and acquired it. And through the years, it's always, obviously people are a little nervous when their company's acquired, but it's always been exciting to see, especially as the company's gotten bigger and these little companies are afraid of these big companies coming and gobbling them up. But when they see how much of a people company Keller is, and really, understand family and understand work-life balance and that type of thing, you work really hard, and sometimes it gets a little bit out of balance when you have something that requires a lot of attention. But the company's always very aware of, that you need to take care of your family, you need to take care of yourself and such. So, and that's something that a lot of the smaller companies that we acquired had that same kind of culture. And that was part of our decision process, whether to acquire a company, was, does their culture match with ours? Because that's important. I mean, people are the biggest part of our business. You've got to maintain that culture. It's what's made us successful. So it's all been really great.
Yeah, so Jim Henry used to say all great companies are built on the back of great people.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And that is so true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Tom Dobson was like that throughout the years. He was always aware if you needed time off for any type of personal things you had to take care of stuff, he said, "Get out of here. Let me know what I need to cover while you're gone, and go take care of it, and take care of your family, or do whatever you have to do." And even today, the number of times we've had young project managers or engineers or whatever, say they really need to move cross country for family reasons, get closer to family or whatever, or their spouse or whatever. We've kind of bent over backwards trying to figure out, okay, how can we get them over to our local office over there and figure it out and make it happen? Because it's family, so you take care of them. So it's as big as we've gotten. We've been able to maintain that well, so that's kind of neat.
Tom Dobson's an incredible dude.
Yeah, yeah.
I went through some personal grief in '97, and so I flew back to England for a week or two, and I got a call from Tom Dobson. I'm like, oh no, he's figured out I'm not at work in Canada. I thought I had made that really hard to figure out. And he goes, how about we meet in the Red Lion in Harpenden? And that's a pub about 10 miles from my parents' house. I'm like, what? Goes, how about like a couple of hours? And so I met him in the pub in Harpenden, and he had figured out I'd gone home, that something horrible was going on, and he just wanted to make sure I was okay. And it was like, he took me out, and I was just like, that right there is a top quality leader. And he was running Keller globally at the time. Really.
Yeah.
Absolutely astonishing dude.
Yeah.
Fantastic guy.
Yeah.
And that culture was so powerful around Dobson and
Mhm.
the people after him. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, and that your culture comes from to a large degree from your leadership, and one can't live without the other. But yeah, I've had a similar situation as Nigel. I had a situation where we had a little one that had health problems, and he just pretty much, that was before direct deposit. So he said, "Hey, write down your checking account number on a piece of paper, give it to me. I'll get your checks in your deposit in your bank. Get out of here. I don't want to see you." And that took a couple months to get that all go through that whole thing. And he was there. He check in periodically, say anything you need, anything we can do for you, and so.
Yeah, and I think, obviously the work is always going to change, but if that culture stays the same, I imagine that's probably the really number one reason why people are so drawn to the company and why they have stayed for such a long time.
Through the years, I can't even count the number of people that were attracted to the grass being green on the other side and going to somebody who offered them maybe a little bit more money or something like
Hmm.
that. And then within months, more often than not, they call and say, "Can I come back?"
Yep.
It's not, I didn't realize what I had. So,
Sure.
so yeah, pretty neat.
Know both of you you're not only, coworkers, colleagues, but you're also really good friends. And I'm sure you have a ton of stories that we cannot talk about on the podcast, but I would love to hear just how your friendship started and just some of the moments that you have shared together too. Because again, you are spending a lot of time with these people that you're working with, almost probably more time during the week than with your actual family. So I'd love to just hear how your friendship started and just what you guys have done together over the 30 some years that you've been here working.
It was funny right after Nigel started. I mean, I think it might have been the first week or something, but I was giving a presentation at ASCE, a national conference in Atlantic City.
Hmm.
So we said, okay, come on up. This is a great way to jump in the deep end and stuff. So I can't remember the hotel, but it was one of these casino type hotels that and back then it was pretty common for people to share rooms. So you go out in the field, you do whatever.
Hmm.
It was just economy of getting a room and having two people stay in it. Everybody
Hmm.
pretty much did. So we did that, and so Nigel and I had shared a room at this conference, and this room was again Vegas / Atlantic City or whatever, but this room was probably 30 feet by 30 feet. And had two beds in the opposite corners, and I think they might have had a big round heart-shaped tub in the middle and everything else. We were in tears laughing. And the story on that, it was pretty uneventful, but the stories have grown and evolved through the years to be pretty crazy. Wild parties and everything else, but we were pretty nerdy young engineers, so
GK and Hayward Baker were families as they grew up together around each other, and kids and wives, and all
Mhm.
kinds of Christmas events and so on and so forth. And that those friendships expanded out through the shop and the field. And
Yeah.
Hmm.
we would know everybody's kids and everybody's wives or husbands and stuff. And it would be part of, our grand design was to be good friends and be good colleagues and and help each other whenever we needed it. I mean, when you had to evacuate for a hurricane, you'd have field guys calling to see if you needed help moving stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
Things like that. It was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And the culture I came from in England, that was not happening. It
Hmm.
was it was very much office. When you leave the office, it's a different world, and that was
Hmm.
not the case here.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, like we said earlier, people like Dobson, but it was brought into this group through people like JD, people like Jim Henry, who were all about family
Hmm.
and all about helping people succeed. And if we can help each other succeed, we'll all be better for it. That kind of stuff was brilliant. So even when Jim Henry forgot to interview me for the whole day on the sofa, I was Baker, Suzanne was like, "Can I get you something? I get you a cup of coffee, or can I get something to eat?" And it was like,
Suzanne was the office
she
manager in
was the
Tampa.
office manager.
Hmm.
And Suzanne, I'm
Yeah.
going to say about 22 or 3 years ago, passed away from some horrible cancer. But she
Mhm.
was absolutely part of the heartbeat of this office then.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep.
And at her funeral, I wandered into this gorgeous blonde woman who became my wife, who was bawling her eyes out because Suzanne had passed away. And you're just like, how do these things happen?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And she's my wife today, sort of thing. And it's just like Suzanne was a big part of this network that we all grew up around. And we had so many people like that.
Yeah.
It was a
Hmm.
Yeah.
unique place,
Yeah. Yeah.
and grown, and that sort of stuff still goes on. It's wonderful.
Yeah. On the local
Hmm.
level. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I know you guys have both sort of mentioned a couple people that have pretty much, impacted your personal life and your, professional life. But are there any other people too that have along the way have maybe, really impacted you or really made you think, wow, I'm really glad I took this job all those years ago?
There's countless numbers,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And a lot of them would have been people who worked in other offices. We were
Yeah.
just talking about Art
Hmm.
Pengelly, who works in Texas. We acquired Woodbine years and years ago, and Art was with Woodbine when we acquired him, and now he runs the central region. And those are these networks of friendships and
Yeah.
work colleagues that we've had for 30 to 40 years. And it's just
Hmm.
amazing how they survive and grow and evolve.
Yeah. And one I can think of um, is related in the business is
Hmm.
a guy by the name of George Burke, who retired about 6, 7 years ago. But George, we just had uh, a conference. There was a DFI conference in Orlando, excuse me, in New Orleans, and he was given not an award but a recognition.
Hmm.
They have something called grouting greats, and it's people that have contributed, through lots of different means, the advancement of grouting and soil mixing and those type of technologies. And so he was being inducted into this group, and he asked me if he had to have someone introduce him and tell little stories about him and stuff. So he asked me if I could do that for him, and so I did that. And it was just so much fun going back and remembering and remembering stories, and because they wanted you to not just share what he did technically, but tell stories about him that maybe no one else would know. And so George was a great influence. He's a great mentor. He's a great colleague and friend. And it was fun to get together with him since he had retired. I hadn't seen him as much, he and his wife, Jane, but we spent a few nights in New Orleans having drinks and food and stuff and catching up. So that was a lot of fun. You talk about something that came to mind when you were mentioning a little bit ago about the atmosphere, the family of the company. I remembered back a number of years ago, we new hire, and I can't remember who this was, but I remember the story real well. After about 2 weeks of being working with the company, he came to me and said, "Okay, where do you hide the jerks?" I said, "Well, we try not to hire him." But that's, he couldn't believe it. I guess through past places he'd worked and stuff, there are always but there aren't many people with egos with the company. You just don't have that. And again, hopefully that is part of our success through the hiring process. But there are a lot of really, really bright people and talented people that work here, and nobody needs to have an ego, and no one does. Everybody appreciates what everybody has to contribute, and understands that's what makes us so successful, and really everybody can learn from everybody. So it's a really neat atmosphere of growth and learning and appreciation for what everybody else does.
Yeah, I was sitting in a room in Texas a few months ago, and one of our competition walked in, who I've known for many years, Richard Shea,
No, yeah.
Morris Shea, and we were looking at joint venturing together, and one of the questions that he was answering was, why would you? And he's like, there are so many smart people at Keller. Why wouldn't you joint venture in Keller? And I was sitting there thinking, yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's interesting to see how he looks at it. He's looking at it exactly that way.
Yeah.
And if we're going to take this job on, we're going to need a lot of these smart people that you got. And that was a very good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Going along with that too, like for our clients and just other people that we're working with, I mean, do you think they are able to see like, wow, this company hires really stellar people who get the job done. They're trying to come in under budget. They're trying to come out ahead of schedule. I mean, do you think our clients are able to see this when they, work with us on these projects?
I think once they get to know us and all, because when you see websites and you see advertising, you don't know if people are just blowing smoke or what they're doing. But I
Sure.
think when they get to know you, we did a poll of clients and such years ago, trying to get an idea of what people thought about us and such. And one of the quotes that I remember that I hesitate even saying because it sounds like you bragging kind of stuff, but they said, it was Hayward Baker days. And I said, he said, what I always loved about Hayward Baker is they were usually the smartest ones in the room, but they didn't act like it. So that was kind of a neat compliment. I mean, they appreciated what we brought, but they also appreciated that again, we didn't have egos. And
Sure.
I think that's not only important in the company and working together in the culture, but when working with others, and that carried forward. I mean, we never felt like we were, God's gift to this project or whatever. And we're going to say that you have confidence. You have to have a little bit of ego, I guess, because we have a lot of confidence that we're going to take care of the problem and do it right and get it done. But it wasn't a personal ego. It wasn't something that we felt like we were better than someone else. We just, had certain skills and experiences that we were able to bring to the table and help our clients. So it's kind of neat.
Sure.
Yeah, there's parallel to that too. Is that, we in the world that I was living in, putting in drill shafts, we took over Jacksonville from a competitor, and Long Foundations used to do a lot of work in Jacksonville, and other competitors used to do a lot of work in Jacksonville, and we started to do more and more of it. And one of the lead engineers who was putting our work on paper and asking for it to be built was Kirk McIntosh, who was ex-Law Engineering, just like JD, and went through all the changes at Law, and he's at Terracon. But I can remember having a conversation with Kirk where he was like, if you're going to do a job, Nigel, I just want to know that you're going to put Rodney in charge of the site. And Rodney Walker was one of my superintendents.
Mhm.
And Kirk believed, quite rightly, that if he called Rodney at 10 o'clock at night to find out what really happened on hole number 23 at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that something went haywire, that Rodney would give him the straight skinny and be all over how we were going to clear it up if we had to, or why everything was good as built. And the same thing goes all over the place with our field.
Mhm.
If the owners believe that the field cares, it makes an enormous difference. Our field and shop, of course, because they support each other, but the field does such a great job of presenting how we're trying to build the best quality that we can. It makes a massive difference on repeat business. Job after job after job we used to get because we'd done job after job and proved that we were going to put quality in the ground.
Yeah.
It wasn't always because you were cheapest or even fastest.
Yeah.
It was because they believed in you.
Yeah.
They'd figure out how to get the job. If I'm going to do this job, I'm going to have those guys do it for me, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely great.
Yeah.
So the Rodney Walkers in St. Pete, it was Randy Hawkins, God rest his soul, who just passed away. But Randy was our guy here, and Jamie Driggers used to insist on having Randy on his job sites
Yeah.
because he trusted him.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Couldn't ask for better.
It goes back to just treating people right and
Right.
doing what you said. And it's funny, I just had a flashback. I think the second job I worked on with the company was at the Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base. And that was, they were building a submarine base from scratch. It was just a piece of property at the, on the water. And this was going to be the Atlantic Fleet. And it was the largest naval construction project. I think it still is ever.
It's J.A. Jones,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And it was $1.5 billion or so base. In today's dollars, it'd be about a $3 billion construction project. But the really essentially, although it took a few more years, essentially was completed within 3 years. So they were doing about $1 million a day in construction completing for 3 years. So it was a massive project. And we had dozens and dozens of structures that they want us to improve the ground below them before they built them for seismic, because Charleston has a history of seismic activity, as well as if they had any accidental explosions or anything, because they had a lot of ordinances and stuff. They didn't want any soils to liquefy and any of the structures to be compromised. So before we started, we had to do an extensive exploration of all these structures and stuff, because we had some data, but not enough. It was going so fast paced. So there was a gentleman called Forrest Foshee, who worked for SNME in Charleston. And so we hired him to help us. I had rigs and such, and he and I spent a lot of late nights in the lab getting all the samples in from the rigs and going through them and classifying the soils and doing up profiles and all. And that relationship I haven't seen Forrest in a little bit, but when I do see him and get up with him, we always, it's like your brother you hadn't seen in a long time. Spending time with clients and they get to, you mentioned, do clients understand who we are and what we bring and stuff. It's those kind of relationships, and they really get to see who you are and what you are, and it goes both ways. I mean, he's great individual, but he understands that when I first started with Tom Dobson, one of the things he told me that sticks with me forever is he said, never leave a site without doing what you said you were going to do. He's saying we're not in it for the quick buck. We're not trying to just do something and make money. He said, yeah, we got to make money to keep in business and, to keep doing what we're doing. But, we're in it for the long haul. We're in it. We want to do the right thing. We want people to be pleased with what we do and want us to continue working together. So, and also it's the right way to work. He said, just don't ever leave a site without doing what you said you do. You get your word is important and you got to stick to it. So I think that's set the culture of our company in that respect up early, and it continues today. We've had very, we do thousands of jobs every year in the company, and probably count on one hand the number of projects that we've had a struggle finishing. We tried to never leave a site without finishing and doing a good job. So, there are all kinds of challenges that come up and such, but that's our goal, and that's what we're always striving to do.
It's a great goal to have, I will say.
Yeah.
You both have sort of shared a couple stories, throughout your career here, but is there one particular story maybe that, each of you have that really stands out to you or really just, resonates with you, and just maybe a favorite project, a favorite client that you've worked with, a favorite team, that just kind of really, when you say the name Keller, that's, the project that kind of stands out in your mind?
I'm going to say if my kid asked me, which he has done kind of,
Hmm.
why do you enjoy wearing a Keller shirt
Hmm.
as much as you do? I would say that it goes back to the days when you realized you were going to be given the freedom to make a difference. And what I didn't like about where I was working prior to Keller was that you were in your compartment and just stay in your lane,
Hmm.
stay between those walls. And what I loved about GK and Hayward Baker and Case and now Keller was you could go out and change the world if you could show that it was a sensible play. And they encouraged that. And that was really interesting to me throughout my career was, okay, if you came up with a plan that was a little different, but it could work and you could make sense out of it, then why not give it a go? And that's a
Mhm.
wonderful thing to be given the opportunity to play your cards that way.
Yeah.
And in that approach, we've done some incredible jobs, like the Memphis Area Transit Authority job that
Yeah.
we did at Hayward Baker.
Yeah.
I mean, we were in Memphis for 2 years. Ron
Wow.
Short ran that job. And that was a site that had been put on Gettle's monotube driven piles in a landfill, and it had settled up to 30 inches. And it was a 23-acre site with 4 buildings on it that had settled up to 30 inches. And they wanted the buildings put back to level. And we went under those buildings, excavated out the clay cap on the landfill, and created new foundations and jacked the buildings up off the new foundations as a design build fix
Mhm.
in 1990 and 1991. That when we got it was the biggest job Hayward Baker had ever done. And they were like, wow, this is crazy. We're drilling micropiles through the monotubes, then jacking the building up from the micropiles. And how on earth are you going to do that? And we were like, I don't know. Ted Graham said we could do it. And we went out there for 2 years and did it.
Yeah. That's
And it
amazing.
was just one of those epic jobs, absolutely
Hmm.
brilliant job. And it led to the Nicholson guys in Atlanta going, we want to work for you.
Yeah.
Remember that? The
Yeah.
whole John
Yeah.
Wallasick, Ron Triplett, Steve Buckner, Peter Newfer, that whole group
Yeah.
called up one night and said they wanted to wear Hayward Baker shirts
Yeah.
because this was amazing what we had done
Yeah. The
in
whole
Memphis.
office for
whole office.
Nicholson decided they wanted to be a Hayward Baker office.
And then
Hmm.
their field came with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just like, and they're still here.
And it's a funny story, along with the success, and Nigel saying, mentioning how you're given the power to change the world, kind of thing. Kind of the flip side of that, I remember from John and stuff, is a story when they hadn't been with us real long, and they had a project going south. It wasn't going well, and I think it was Bob Rubright at the time, and Tom Dobson, and a few people, George Burke. They flew down to meet with them in the office, and they, from their previous companies they had been with, they thought, oh gosh, we're all going to get canned. And they were coming down to brainstorm with them and say, okay, how do we correct this? How do we get this going in the right direction? How do we fix this and make
Hmm.
sure the client gets what they were supposed to get? And they came away with it saying, okay, great, we got a direction, we got a way, let's make it happen. And I think when the people left and went back to the corporate office, they were sitting around with their jaws hanging open saying, we didn't get fired. And said, no, you guys are doing the best you could, and you ran into something unusual and you weren't expecting. That's what you do. You pull in the resources, you figure it out, and move on. And that's one of the great things about our company is the willingness to help and to share and
Roll up your sleeves.
roll up your sleeves, and even globally it
Hmm.
carries from Keller everywhere. And that was in the early days, pretty much when emails had almost just started. We started email groups by technique and technology that, if you were on a fiber replacement job, a stone column job, and you ran into something very unusual, you could all of a sudden send an email to this group saying, "Hey, I've run into this. Anybody have any ideas?" And within 15 minutes, you'd be getting emails from around the world. "Yeah, I ran into this here, and this is how we took it, fixed it, and addressed it, and that should work." And so it's, and Naja and I were talking about this just earlier today, how people that it's the middle of the night for them, or it's the middle of the night for us, and it's just getting in the office, they're getting right back with you and trying to help you out. So that's
Sure.
kind of a neat part of the culture. Probably one of the projects that I go back and think of kind of neat in my career was for one of the launch pads at the Cape, and I was in the office in our shop actually, and I got paged that I had a call online, so and so. So I went over to the wall and grabbed a wall phone and said, "This is Jim Hussin," and it said, "This is General so and so with the U.S. Air Force. And I need to see if you're available for a meeting tomorrow over at the Cape, which is a couple-hour drive from Tampa here across the state." And I said, sure, I can make that. And he goes, "Good, because if you said you couldn't make it, I was going to tell you you're going to be here." I said, "Well, I'm glad I agreed." He said, "Oh, and bring some extra clothes." And I said, "Okay, how much extra clothes?" But they had a lot of people don't realize that the Cape, the northern part is NASA with its time space shuttles and such launch, but the southern part is the Air Force, half of it. And that's they put a lot of satellites in orbit for watching parts of the world they need to keep eye on. And they had a satellite on a launch pad that was on a rocket, and they were going to launch it in 2 weeks. They had it all set, and they had some settlement issues with the tracks. That there's a building that surrounds the rocket on the launch pad, and a couple hours before launch, it backs up on a couple of railroad tracks 500 feet into a park position. But the rails in between the two positions had settled, and they were afraid they were going to have a stability problem with the building if they tried to back it up. So, but anyway, long story short, we came in and did compassion grinding, another run short job. And we had two cranes, one on each of the rails, and worked around the clock for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And it was kind of wild because the closest hotels were about 45 minutes away. So for about 2 weeks, probably had about 3 hours a night sleep and getting back and keeping it going, and got it done. And they got the launch off and on. We were invited to launch to watch it, and I think I slept for 4 days afterwards. But it was just amazing to be able to come in there and solve a problem. And in those kind of high energy atmosphere, we'd have a meeting every morning, and they'd say, "Okay, what is Hayward Baker doing on the launch pad today?" He said, "Well, we're going to do this and this. Is there anything that could slow you down or get in your way?" And say, "Well, if this happens, that could mess us up." And General would turn to somebody and say, "So make sure that doesn't happen." "Okay, anything else?" And I said, "This is great. It's like
Yeah.
construction in heaven." The clients are like making sure you were productive and efficient and getting it done. So, but that was a fun project. It was a little wild and crazy, not a very common one, but there were a lot of those type of projects through the years that were very important, very urgent, maybe not national security type things, but very serious structural issues with structures, and that we've been called in to help out with. And I think those are particularly when they appreciate what we bring to the table, when they know something has to be done right and quickly, and no questions asked. And those are also fun projects to work on.
So now I'm going to kind of put you both on the spot.
Oh, gosh.
I'll give you a second to think, but it's more of what word first comes to mind for you. So if you could describe in one word your experience so far at Keller from the very first day you set foot in the office to right now, what would that word be?
The one word probably is family that I think of, and Nigel's mentioned it too. It's a little more challenging. When we started, it was a dozen people or so. But it's obviously very large now, but still, you still have that same culture on the local level, each office and such. And it still prevails because most of the people in the corporate office came up through the operations, through the offices, through that. So they still appreciate that and understand the importance, and it's part of who they are. So anyway, long answer to one word question.
I think families is the right word. This company cares about the company family and your family.
Mhm.
And if they're both clicking, everybody does really well out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important. And all the way through the field, all these guys and girls who travel over the country and see their kids every 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever it is, that's a really tough duty.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to keep looking after those people, because that's the sharp point of a spear.
Mm-hmm.
And we do very well by them, and they do very well by us, and we must keep doing that.
Yeah.
Here's a voicemail I got from a field guy, which I've kept since December of 2010.
Hey, Nigel. Just wanted to wish you a Happy New Year is what I called you for earlier, and to tell you, don't worry about things. We're going to dominate. This year's the year. You just get us the jobs, and we'll show them who the best drill shaft company is in the United States. I'm not talking about Southeast. All right? You have a new year, and let's go get them next year. Keep working on your guys, and I'll start pounding the field. Bye.
Those kind of voicemails,
Yeah.
those calls from, the guy in the wilderness who's just like, I got it. You're going to hear about this, but I got it. I just letting you know that when the guy calls screaming at you, we've already fixed it, and he doesn't know yet.
Yeah.
So that you know, and it's just like that kind of stuff is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And we're really, really blessed with those people out there doing that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think that's if we can leave all our listeners with one thing today, I think that is a good message to just share that, we are obviously everybody knows the work that we do. I'm sure they see our rigs as they're driving up and down the highway. Maybe they're, out working on one of the stadiums or, an airport. But I don't think a lot of times they realize the people who work for us and what they do, whether that's in the field or in the office. So I really appreciate you both just joining me today and talking a little bit about your experiences, and then also just Keller as a whole and who we are, what the people do here. We're more than just our name. We have a lot of people here who have families, great stories to share. So I'm really excited that we had you guys on today. And I'm sure if I had to say for myself, I think you'll probably be joining us again for another episode later on.
I really look forward to it. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's been nice reminiscing.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren.
And that about wraps it up for our show today. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you were able to learn a little bit more about the people who make our company so great. And as always, make sure to follow us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can always visit our website for more information at www.keller-na.com.